In the shadowed cradle of the eternal winter, where the moon wept silver tears upon the frozen earth, a single rose bloomed defiant amid the ice, its petals stained with the blood of forgotten oaths. The wind howled like a forsaken lover through the jagged peaks of the Iron Spine Mountains, carrying the scent of pine resin and distant smoke. Ilara stumbled through the snowdrifts, her breath ragged plumes in the frigid air, each step a betrayal of her weakening body. She was no stranger to exile. The Dhampir blood in her veins had always marked her as an aberration, half-human frailty cursed with immortal hunger. But this banishment cut deeper than the silver chains that once bound her wrists in the council's dungeons. They had called her an impostor, a shadow puppeteering the throne's rightful heir. And now, the matriarchs of the Silverfang Pack decreed her death. Her fingers, numb and trembling, clutched the ritual scar on her collarbone, a jagged crescent etched in ritual fire during her ill-fated bonding ceremony. It burned now, not from the cold, but from the echo of his touch, the Alpha King who had claimed her against all law, Thorn. His name was a wound she could not staunch. The scar pulsed with the memory of that night under the blood moon when their fates had twisted together in a union forbidden by both wolf and fang. She had been his secret, his salvation whispered in the dark chambers of Blackthorn Keep. But secrets, like blood, always spilled. The forest loomed ahead, a labyrinth of ancient pines bowed under snow, their branches clawing at the starless sky. Ilara's vision blurred, the hunger gnawing at her core, a thirst that human warmth could never slake, yet wolfish vigor had briefly tamed. She collapsed against a trunk, the bark rough against her cheek, and tasted salt on her lips. Tears? No, the first trickle of blood from a cracked lip. How poetic, she thought bitterly, that her end would mirror her beginning, alone, rejected, bleeding into the white void. In the distance, the council's horns blared, a guttural call that stirred the wild in her veins. They came for her, the enforcers with their silver-tipped spears and eyes gleaming with righteous fury. "Kill the impostor," the high matriarch had intoned in the great hall, her voice echoing off walls draped in wolf pelts and vampiric relics. Ilara had stood there, chained before the assembled packs, her gown torn and her scar bared like an accusation. The Alphas had growled their assent, all save one. Thorn had risen then, his massive frame silhouetted against the roaring hearth, his eyes, storm-gray and tormented, locked on hers. But he had not spoken. Not yet. The memory clawed at her, the way his hand had twitched toward his sword, the subtle shift in his stance that betrayed the war within. Ethical to a fault, he carried the weight of his pack's honor like a crown of thorns. Melancholy clung to him as surely as the scent of pine and earth, a king haunted by the ghosts of battles won and loves lost. He had chosen exile for her once before, defying the old laws that forbade unions across the Vale. Yet now, with the council's decree hanging like a noose, doubt festered in her heart. Had his protection been a fleeting madness or the spark of something eternal? A twig snapped behind her, sharp as a breaking bone. Ilara whirled, her fangs elongating instinctively, the Dhampir instincts surging through her diluted blood. Shadows shifted among the trees, not the council's hunters, but something wilder, wolves perhaps, drawn by the scent of her weakness. Or worse, the undead whispers that haunted these borders, vampires exiled from their own shadowed courts. She pressed onward, the scar throbbing like a second heartbeat, guiding her toward the ruins of Eldergrove, the ancient temple where outcasts sought refuge. If she could reach it, perhaps the old magics would shield her long enough to vanish into the night. The snow deepened, swallowing her boots, and with it came the visions, fragments of their stolen nights. Thorn's calloused hands tracing her scar, his voice a low rumble. "You are no impostor, Ilara. You are the moon to my tide, the fire to my frost." He had been broken even then, guilty over the death of his mate years prior, a loss that had hollowed his soul. She had offered him redemption, her blood a bridge between worlds, but love was no balm for such wounds. It was a curse, demanding choices that scarred deeper than any ritual blade. A howl pierced the silence, closer now, answered by another. The pack closed in. Alara's legs buckled, the cold seeping into her bones like accusation. She sank to her knees, the ritual scar glowing faintly under her torn bodice, as if the moon itself mourned her fall. What was destiny, if not the cruel jest of fates entwined? She had chosen him, mortal passion igniting immortal longing, but now rejection loomed as her throne. Die here, a pretender's end, or fight, and damn them both. The first enforcer emerged from the tree line, his furred cloak billowing, axe raised. Alara rose, defiance blooming in her chest like that bloodied rose, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of salvation. In the wind's wail, she thought she heard a roar, not of pursuit, but of protection. Thorn. But roars faded in the storm, and trust was a fragile thing, easily shattered by the weight of crowns and councils. As the blade descended, she whispered to the indifferent moon, "If eternity is a choice, let mine be fire, not frost." The blade hung suspended in the air for a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, the enforcer's eyes widening in shock as a thunderous roar shattered the storm's howl. It came from the shadows beyond the tree line, primal and unyielding, a sound that vibrated through Alara's bones like the earth's own fury. Thorn. He burst forth like a tempest incarnate, his massive form clad in black fur and leather, snow exploding around his boots as he charged. The axe-wielder barely had time to turn before the Alpha King's fist connected with his jaw, a crack of bone echoing like splintering ice. The enforcer crumpled, lifeless in the drift, his weapon buried harmlessly in the snow. Alara staggered back, her ritual scar searing as if branded anew, the crescent mark pulsing with the rhythm of his approach. Thorn's storm-gray eyes found hers amid the chaos, wild with a desperation that mirrored her own. Blood streaked his face from a fresh gash across his brow, and his left arm hung limp, the scent of silver poison wafting from a wound hidden beneath his cloak. He was broken, this king of wolves, his ethical core fractured by the choices that had led him here, defying the council for a love that bridged the impossible. Guilt shadowed him always, a melancholy shroud woven from the threads of his lost mate and the pack's unraveling honor, but in this moment it fueled his roar. "Run!" he bellowed, his voice a gravelly command laced with pain, as two more enforcers lunged from the gloom, their spears glinting under the moon's indifferent gaze. Alara's fangs ached, the Dhampir hunger surging in response to the violence, but she forced her legs to move, following the path he carved through the fray. He fought like the wild incarnate, claws extending from his fingertips, tearing through fur and flesh with a precision born of wars long past. One spear grazed his side, drawing a hiss from him, yet he pressed on, shielding her with his body as they plunged deeper into the forest's maw. The pines closed around them, branches whipping like vengeful spirits, the wind carrying the distant clamor of pursuit. Alara's breath came in sharp gasps, her vision tunneling from exhaustion and the scar's relentless burn. It was no mere mark. It bound them, a ritual forged in secrecy under the blood moon, where her Dhampir essence had mingled with his alpha vitality. She had been his hidden flame, a lover who eased the eternal ache of his solitude, but now that bond dragged them both toward ruin. Why had he come? The council's decree was clear: kill the impostor, or face exile eternal. His protection was a madness, a roar against the tide that could drown them both. They broke through a thicket into a narrow ravine, the walls of ice-slick rock rising like the jaws of some ancient beast. Thorn shoved her ahead, his hand lingering on her arm, a touch both tender and tormented, before he spun to face the shadows. "Go to Eldergrove," he growled, his breath fogging the air. The ruins will hide you, I'll hold them. Blood dripped from his wounds, staining the snow in crimson petals, echoing the defiant rose that had marked her exile's dawn. Alara halted, turning to him, her heart a war drum in her chest. The scar throbbed in sympathy, a living reminder of their stolen nights in Blackthorn Keep's hidden alcoves, where candlelight danced on his scarred torso and her whispers coaxed confessions from his lips. He had spoken then of his guilt, the mate he had failed to save from a rival pack's raid, her death a shadow that made him vow never to love again. Yet with Alara, he had glimpsed redemption, a bridge between the wolf's fierce loyalty and the vampire's cursed longevity. Her blood, rare and lunar-touched, had sustained him through battles, but it was her compassion that had thawed his frost-bound soul. Now, that same soul risked everything for her. "No," she whispered, the word tasting of blood and defiance. The hunger clawed at her, urging her to flee, to survive as the outcast she was born to be. But love was no simple instinct. It was a choice, resisted and rationalized until it bled into inevitability. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing the gash on his brow, feeling the heat of his fevered skin. "You roar for me, but at what cost, Thorn? Your pack will brand you traitor. The council will hunt us both." His eyes softened, the melancholy deepening like storm clouds over the iron-spine peaks. He cupped her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, calloused and gentle. "What is honor, Alara, if not protecting what the heart claims? I chose you once, in the fire of that ritual. I choose you again, even if it crowns me with exile's thorns." The words hung between them, philosophical in their gravity, a quiet rebellion against the fates that sought to sever them. Yet doubt flickered in his gaze, the ethical king weighing the pack's survival against this forbidden pull. A howl rent the night, closer, the enforcer's pack closing the net. Thorn's body tensed, the wound on his arm weeping silver-tainted blood, weakening him with each pulse. Alara's scar ignited then, a glow faint as moonlight on frost, drawing a gasp from her. It was her domo occulto stirring, the lunar mark that tied her Dhampir heritage to ancient prophecies, whispers of a union that could mend or shatter realms. She was no mere impostor, she was the key, her blood the elixir that could heal his poison or curse him further into immortality's shadow. "Thorn," she breathed, the connection instinctive, feared, denied no longer. In his touch, she felt the tide turn, empathy blooming amid the terror. But as the first wolf form crested the ravine, eyes glowing with fanatic zeal, the dilemma clawed at her. Flee alone and let him fall, preserving his kingship at the cost of her soul, or bind their fates tighter, inviting the council's wrath upon them both? The scar burned like a vow unspoken, the moon above watching silently as choices loomed, sharp as descending blades. Eternity whispered temptations, but freedom demanded blood, and in that moment, Alara wondered if love's redemption was worth the crown of shared damnation. The ravine's jagged walls pressed in like the ribs of a colossal beast, exhaling gusts of wind that carried the metallic tang of blood and the acrid bite of silver. Alara's heart thundered, a frantic rhythm echoing the distant weavos that clawed through the night, drawing nearer with predatory intent. Thorn stood before her, a bulwark of furred muscle and unyielding will, his silhouette etched against the moon's pale glow, filtering through the storm clouds. The ritual scar on her collarbone flared, a crescent of fire beneath her skin, syncing with the ragged cadence of his breath. It was no accident, this bond. It was the scar's curse, weaving their pains into a single thread, pulling taut with every shared glance. She could flee now, slip into the shadows of Eldergrove's ruins, where the ancient stones whispered protections against both wolf and fang. The Dhampir in her urged it. Survival's cold logic, an inheritance from her vampiric sire, who had abandoned her to the human world's cruelties long ago. But Thorn's presence anchored her, his storm-gray eyes holding a plea unspoken. Stay, fight, choose us. His wounds wept, the silver poison threading through his veins like insidious frost, sapping the alpha vigor that had once made him invincible. He had roared for her, defied the council that birthed his kingship. Yet in his gaze lingered the melancholy of a man who knew every protection came at the cost of isolation deeper than any exile. The first wolf crested the ravine's lip, a hulking enforcer in half-shift, fur rippling over sinew as he leaped down with a snarl that shook loose cascades of snow. Thorn met him mid-air, their bodies colliding in a visceral crash of claws and fangs, rolling across the frozen ground in a tangle of savagery. Ilara's instincts surged, her own fangs elongating as the hunger twisted in her gut. Not for blood alone, but for the wild essence that Thorn embodied, a vitality her diluted heritage craved. She lunged forward, not as prey, but as partner, her nails raking the enforcer's flank as Thorn pinned him, the king's jaws clamping on the intruder's throat in a spray of hot crimson. They rose together, slick with the fallen's life, the air thick with the coppery mist. More shadows stirred above, 3, perhaps 4, their eyes reflecting the moon like accusatory stars. "Ilara, go!" Thorn rasped again, his voice fraying at the edges, the poison's grip tightening. But she shook her head, the scar's heat spreading through her chest like liquid moonlight, illuminating fragments of memory. Their ritual in Blackthorn Keep's hidden crypt, where candle flames had danced on walls etched with lunar runes. He had marked her then, his ethical soul demanding consent even in passion's fever, whispering of guilt over his lost mate. A queen whose death in a border skirmish had left him hollow, vowing solitude until Ilara's compassion pierced the veil. No, she would not leave him to bleed alone. The bond demanded reciprocity, a bleeding of souls as much as flesh. Together, they scrambled up the ravine's far side, hands clasped in desperate solidarity, the scar pulsing like a shared heartbeat. Her touch steadied him, her Dhampir blood seeping through their joined palms, a subtle transfer, instinctive and feared. It eased the silver's burn, just enough to draw a growl of surprise from him, his eyes widening as vigor flickered back into his limbs. "What sorcery is this?" he murmured, low and reverent, as they crested the ridge and plunged into the denser woods bordering Elder Grove. The ruins emerged like the bones of a forgotten god, crumbling arches draped in icicles, altars cracked by centuries of frost, and a central dome where the moon's light pooled in ethereal silver. Wind sighed through the stones, carrying echoes of ancient chants, lunar hymns that stirred the scar to life, its glow now visible, casting faint shadows on the snow-dusted flagstones. They collapsed within the dome's shelter, Thorn's back against a pillar veined with frost, Ilara kneeling before him, tearing strips from her cloak to bind his wounds. The air hummed with silence, broken only by their labored breaths, the distant pursuit muffled by the temple's wards, old magics woven from fang and fur alike. As she worked, her fingers trembled against his skin, tracing the scars of old battles, reminders of wars where alphas clashed with vampiric lords over borderlands soaked in blood. His hand covered hers, calloused and warm despite the cold, pulling her closer until their foreheads touched. Empathy bloomed then, fragile as a flame in the gale, born from the shared terror of the chase. "You should have let me face them alone," he said, his voice a rumble of confession, laced with the melancholy that defined him. "The council sees you as the fracture in our pack's spine, an impostor Dhampir weaving lies with your blood's allure. I roared to protect you, but it dooms us both. My honor, it crumbles like these stones." Ilara's throat tightened, the scar's warmth spreading to her core, awakening something deeper, a revelation stirring like embers in ash. Her blood, lunar-touched from a lineage whispered in vampiric tomes, was no mere curse. It was a key, forged in the fires of ancient pacts between wolves and immortals. In his presence, it manifested, easing his poison not by accident, but by design. She pulled back slightly, meeting his gaze. The connection no longer denied, but acknowledged in the quiet intimacy of the ruins. "And what of your guilt, Thorn? You carry it like a second skin, from the mate you lost to treachery. I see it in your eyes, the fear that loving again invites more death. But this scar, it chose us. My blood heals you because we are bound, Alpha and Dhampir, in a destiny the Council fears." He searched her face, the ethical king wrestling with the pull, his fingers tightening on her wrist. The wind outside howled, a chorus of approaching foes, but within these walls the bond bled deeper, tenderness forged in the crucible of rejection. She leaned in, her lips brushing his in a kiss born of desperation, tasting salt and blood, the hunger yielding to something profounder, redemption's tentative spark. Yet as the scar's glow intensified, illuminating runes on the altar that spoke of unions defying eternity, doubt clawed at her. This power, her dom occulto, could save him now, but at what price? To fully reveal it meant embracing her vampiric heritage, inviting the immortal solitude he so feared, and binding their fates in a choice that might crown them with power or condemn them to endless war. The first distant howl breached the wards, a warning tremor through the stones. Thorn rose, pulling her with him, his strength renewed by her essence, but his eyes shadowed with the weight of impending judgment. Ilara felt the dilemma coil in her chest. Reveal the full extent of her gift, risking the Council's ancient vendetta against such hybrids, or withhold it, letting his wounds fester and their refuge crumble. Love was no salve. It was a moral forge, demanding she choose between his fleeting mortality and the eternity they might share. As the moon crested higher, bathing the ruins in unforgiving light, she whispered to the indifferent night, "What is freedom, if not the liberty to bleed for another's dawn?" But dawn brought hunters, and with it, the trial of their entwined souls. The moon hung like a sentinel's blade above Eldergrove's shattered dome, its silver light fracturing through cracks in the ancient stone, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters across the frost-veined floor. Ilara's breath caught in her throat, a fragile veil between composure and the storm raging within. The ritual scar on her collarbone thrummed with an insistent heat, no longer a mere echo of their forbidden union, but a living conduit, channeling the lunar essence that coursed through her Dhampir veins. Thorn stood beside her, his renewed vigor a testament to the subtle alchemy of her touch, the way her blood had seeped into his wounds, countering the silver's venom like moonlight dissolving fog. Yet in his storm-gray eyes she saw the fracture, the ethical king torn between the pull of their bond and the inexorable tide of duty crashing against the ruin's walls. The distant howls swelled into a symphony of pursuit, the Council's enforcers weaving through the bordering woods like threads of inevitable doom. Ilara pressed her palm to the scar, feeling its pulse quicken, awakening fragments of memory not her own, visions of vampiric sires long dust, their bloodlines etched in tomes hidden within these very stones. Her heritage was no diluted curse, it was a bridge, forged in the primordial pacts between immortal fangs and the wild pacts that once guarded the veil between worlds. The scar had marked her as such during their ritual under the blood moon's gaze in Blackthorn Keep, where Thorn's guilt-laden confessions had spilled like wine on altar cloths. He had spoken of his lost mate then, her life snuffed in a raid that scarred his soul deeper than any claw, leaving him a monarch adrift in melancholy's sea. Ilara had offered solace, her compassion a quiet rebellion against his self-imposed exile from love. But now that solace demanded revelation, pulling her toward a precipice. "We cannot stay," Thorn murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the chill air. his hand encircling her wrist with a gentleness that belied the warrior's frame. Blood still flecked his cloak, dark blooms against the black fur, and the scent of it mingled with the ruin's musty earthiness, stirring the hunger coiled in her core. She met his gaze, the connection a tangible force now, instinctive and unyielding, weaving empathy from the threads of their shared peril. In his touch, she glimpsed his torment, the alpha who had roared defiance against the council's decree, protecting her as both lover and enigma, yet haunted by the fear that his choice would unravel the pack's fragile honor. The wards hold for now, but they will break. Lead me to the inner sanctum. There may be relics to bolster us. Elara nodded, her heart a forge of conflicting fires. The warmth of his faith in her clashing with the cold dread of what her awakening might unleash. She guided him through the dome's labyrinthine corridors, their footsteps muffled on flagstones etched with faded runes, symbols of lunar cycles and blood oaths that hummed in response to her scar's glow. The air grew thicker, laced with the faint metallic tang of ancient magic, and torches long extinguished flickered to life in sconces, their flames pale and wavering as if breathing with the temple's pulse. Wind whispered through fissures, carrying snippets of the outer storm, the crack of branches under wolfish paws, the guttural snarls of enforcers scenting their quarry. They emerged into the sanctum's heart, a circular chamber dominated by a cracked altar where a massive obsidian mirror stood sentinel. Its surface rippled like frozen water, reflecting the moon in distorted waves. Elara's reflection stared back, her pale skin luminous, fangs subtly visible in the half-light, the scar a radiant crescent that seemed to draw the moonlight inward. Thorn halted beside her, his breath hitching as the glow intensified, bathing them in an ethereal silver that made the air shimmer. "Elara," he breathed, the melancholy in his tone laced with awe. "What is this power you hide? It mends me, but I sense more. A depth that terrifies even the wild in me." She turned to him, the scar's heat spreading like roots through her limbs, igniting the domo occulto that had slumbered since her banishment. It was no gentle stirring. It erupted, a torrent of lunar essence flooding her senses, visions cascading, her vampiric lineage tracing back to the first immortals who brokered peace with the alphas, her blood a rare elixir capable of bridging mortality and eternity. The scar pulsed, and from her palm, a thread of silver light extended, wrapping around Thorn's wounded arm, drawing out the silver poison in wisps of dark vapor that dissipated like smoke. He gasped, his body arching as vitality surged back, muscles knitting, the gash on his brow sealing with a faint hiss. But with the healing came the cost. Her own veins burned, the Dhampir hunger twisting into something profounder, a thirst not just for blood, but for the essence of life itself, the wild, untamed force that defined him. Tears pricked her eyes, not from pain, but from the weight of revelation. She was the key, her blood the prophecies' fulcrum, destined to either redeem the fractured realms or ignite their downfall. "This is me, Thorn," she whispered, her voice trembling with the vulnerability of truths long buried. "Not an impostor, but a daughter of both worlds, Dhampir born of a forbidden union, my scar the mark of ancestors who wove wolf and fang into one fate. It heals you, because we are meant to stand as one, against the Council's blindness, but to embrace it fully. It binds us to eternity's shadow. Your mortality, my curse. They entwine, and the Pax will see it as abomination." His hand rose to cup her face, thumb tracing the scar's edge, his touch a anchor amid the maelstrom. The ethical core of him shone through the guilt, a quiet resolve born of choices that had already cost him everything. "Then let them come," he said, his voice steady despite the melancholy etching lines around his eyes. "I have carried wounds enough, the ghost of my mate, the throne's thorns. If your blood offers redemption, not just survival, I claim it, but Elara, This power, does it demand my humanity, eternity as a price for our dawn? The question hung like a blade, philosophical and piercing, as the sanctum's wards shuddered under the assault outside, enforcers' claws scraping stone, howls echoing demands for surrender. Ilara's heart fractured under the dilemma: fully manifest her gift, infusing him with her immortal essence to forge an unbreakable alliance, or temper it, preserving his wolfish freedom at the risk of his life. Love resisted her still, rationalized as a fleeting madness, yet it bled into certainty, a moral trial where compassion clashed with the fear of cursing him with her solitude. The mirror reflected their entwined forms, the scar's light weaving patterns of prophecy, roses of blood blooming in the glass, defiant against the frost. A thunderous crack split the air, the outer dome breached, shadows spilling into the corridors like ink. Thorn drew his sword, the blade glinting with reflected moonlight, positioning himself between her and the encroaching dark. Ilara felt the power crest, demanding release, her blood singing of unions that could shatter councils and crown outcasts. But as the first enforcer's roar pierced the sanctum, she wondered, was this renacimento a gift of shared eternity, or the first step into condemnation's embrace? The moon watched, silent witness, as choices crystallized like ice, sharp, unyielding, and inevitable. The sanctum's obsidian mirror shattered the moon's gaze into 1,000 fractured truths, each shard reflecting Ilara's unraveling resolve like accusations etched in silver. The air thickened with the acrid scent of scorched stone as the enforcers breached the inner wards, their howls morphing into guttural war cries that reverberated off the rune-carved walls. Ilara's ritual scar blazed, a crescent inferno beneath her skin, its heat now a double-edged blade, empowering her with lunar fury while siphoning her strength into Thorn's mending flesh. She stood transfixed, the revelation's aftershocks rippling through her. Her Dhampir blood, no longer a hidden shame, but a prophetic force, capable of forging alliances across the veil. Yet in its awakening, she felt the curse deepen, the immortal hunger twisting like thorns around her heart, demanding she confront not just the hunters, but the moral chasm yawning before them. Thorn's sword arm steadied, the silver poison purged from his veins, leaving only the faint echo of pain in his storm-gray eyes. He positioned himself at the chamber's threshold, a sentinel forged from the Ironspine Mountain's unyielding stone, his broad frame blocking the encroaching shadows. Blood from the earlier fray still clung to his cloak in dark rivulets, mingling with the sanctum's frost-kissed air to create a metallic haze that clung to Ilara's tongue. She could taste the wild in him, the alpha essence that had once tamed her thirst during their stolen nights in Blackthorn Keep, nights where candle flames had flickered like hesitant confessions, illuminating the guilt that hollowed his soul. He had whispered then of his lost mate, her death in a treacherous border raid, a wound that festered, making every act of protection a penance. Now, that same guilt fueled his stance, ethical to the core, as he glanced back at her, his voice a gravelly anchor amid the chaos. "Stay behind me, Ilara. This judgment is mine to face. The council's blade falls first on the king who defies." But his words carried the weight of doubt, the melancholy king aware that his roar of protection had already branded him traitor, unraveling the pack's honor like frayed wolf pelt. She stepped forward, the scar's glow casting her shadow long and defiant across the altar, her fangs aching with the surge of power. The connection between them was no longer a whisper, but a roar in her blood, instinctive and unyielding, binding their fates in a tapestry of empathy and terror. Outside, the wind howled in complicity, whipping snow through the breached corridors like vengeful spirits, carrying the scent of fur, steel, and unbridled rage. The enforcers poured in, 5 now, led by Garrick, the high enforcer whose scar-twisted face bore the mark of old grudges against Thorn's line. His eyes, yellowed with fanatic zeal, locked on Ilara, the impostor who had ensnared their king. "Thorn, stand down," Garrick snarled, his half-shifted form rippling with muscle, claws extended like obsidian hooks. Behind him, the others fanned out, spears leveled, their breaths fogging the air in plumes of accusation. The matriarchs decree it. The Dhampir pretender dies, and you, who shield her, share her exile, or worse. She weaves illusions with that cursed blood, fracturing the pack's spine. Kill her. Reclaim your throne, or join the outcasts in the frozen wastes. Thorn's grip tightened on his sword, the blade humming with latent fury, but he did not strike. Instead, he planted himself wider, a living barrier, his voice booming through the sanctum like thunder over the peaks. She is no pretender, Garrick. The scar binds us, a ritual born of Blood Moon's truth, not deception. Ilara's essence mends what the Council's blindness breaks. Stand against her, and you stand against the wild itself. Ilara's heart fractured under the weight of his words, the scar pulsing in rhythm with the distant huevos echoing from the outer ruins. She felt exposed, the revelation stripping her bare, her domo occulto laid open, lunar-touched blood that could heal or corrupt. Bridgewolf and Fang, or ignite eternal war. The enforcers advanced, their steps crunching on frost-shattered stone, and she sensed the political undercurrents, the Council's fear of hybrids like her, whispers of ancient prophecies foretelling a union that would upend the matriarch's iron rule. Garrick's sneer twisted into a growl, revealing fangs stained with the blood of lesser outcasts. Prophecy. You speak madness, King. The matriarchs see only treason. Her kind poisoned the borders once, turning alphas to immortal slaves. We end it here. The first spear thrust forward, aimed at Thorn's flank, but he parried with a clash that sparked like fire on ice, the force sending vibrations up Ilara's arm where their bond thrummed. Chaos erupted, claws raking stone, bodies colliding in visceral grunts and sprays of blood that painted the runes crimson. Ilara dodged a lunging enforcer, her own instincts surging, the scar channeling lunar light into her veins. She struck out, nails elongated into talons, tearing through fur and eliciting a yelp that echoed her inner turmoil. But each blow deepened the dilemma. Fight as his equal, revealing her power fully and inviting the Council's full wrath, or hold back, letting Thorn bear the brunt and preserving a fragile illusion of his solitary kingship. Garrick circled, his eyes flicking to the glowing scar, recognition dawning like a storm's edge. The lunar mark. It manifests. Matriarchs spoke of this, the key that could crown or condemn. Thorn, she dooms you. Choose. Power with us, or eternity's curse with her. The words pierced deeper than any blade, forcing Ilara to confront the trial's core. Thorn staggered from a glancing wound, silver-tipped claw grazing his shoulder, yet he roared, driving Garrick back with a sweep that cracked ribs. In that moment, his gaze met hers across the fray, melancholy etched in blood-streaked features, the ethical soul pleading for her choice to mirror his, love over legacy, compassion over crown. Ilara's blood sang, the scar igniting a cascade of silver threads that lashed out instinctively, ensnaring an enforcer's spear and shattering it to splinters. The power thrilled and terrified, a renascimento whispering of unions that could redeem fractured realms, yet at the cost of her humanity's last tether. Garrick recovered, lunging at her with feral precision, but Thorn intercepted, their bodies slamming into the altar in a tangle of savagery. As Thorn pinned him, gasping through the pain, Ilara knelt beside them, her hand pressing to the king's chest, feeling his heart's wild beat against her palm. Thorn, the Council offers you salvation without me. Power, pack, freedom from guilt's chains. Choose them. Let me be the sacrifice. He shook his head, blood trickling from his lip, his voice a ragged whisper amid the enforcer's recovering snarls. What is eternity, if not choosing who we bleed for? I rejected the throne's cold honor once for you. I reject it again." The confession hung, philosophical and raw, as Garrick broke free, rallying the others for a final assault. The sanctum trembled, stones groaning under the onslaught, the moon's light fracturing further in the mirror's remnants. Ilara rose, the scars blazed, demanding she infuse him fully, granting immortality's edge, binding their souls in unbreakable defiance. But at what moral price? To save him meant cursing his wolfish freedom, turning love's redemption into shared isolation. As the enforcers closed in, spears raised like judgments from the stars, she teetered on the ethical abyss. Embrace the power and damn them to eternal war, or withhold it, watching his mortality claim him in the name of fleeting liberty. The wind wailed its indifference, blood pooling like defiant roses on the frost, and in that suspended breath, Ilara tasted the bitter truth. Love was no crown, but a forge where souls either merged in fire or shattered in silence. The sanctum's air hung heavy with the reek of blood and scorched stone, the fractured obsidian mirror scattering moonlight like shards of broken vows across the fray. Ilara's ritual scar seared through her veins like molten silver, each pulse a demand for surrender, to the power awakening within her, to the bond that tethered her to Thorn's faltering form. He fought with the ferocity of a cornered beast, his sword a blur of steel and shadow, parrying Garrick's relentless assault while the other enforcers circled like wolves, scenting weakness. Blood slicked the flagstones, pooling in crimson rivulets that mirrored the defiant rose of her exile, and the wind clawed through the breached walls, howling elegies for the choices yet to be made. She watched, transfixed, as Thorn drove his blade into an enforcer's shoulder, the man's yelp twisting into a gurgle that drowned in the metallic spray. His movements, though renewed by her essence, carried the weight of his melancholy. A king's grace eroded by guilt, each strike a penance for the mate he had failed, for the pack he now doomed. Ilara's heart twisted, the scar amplifying his pain as if it were her own, empathy bleeding into her like the cold seeping from the stones. She had resisted this pull from the first, rationalizing it as a Dampir's desperate illusion, a hunger masquerading as love. But here, amid the visceral clash, denial crumbled. It was a curse, demanding she choose between his mortality's fragile fire and the eternity that shadowed her blood. Garrick lunged again, his claws raking Thorn's side, reopening the silver-tainted wound with a hiss of venom. The Alpha staggered, a low growl escaping his lips, but he did not yield, shoving the enforcer back against the altar with a force that cracked the ancient wood. "Enough!" Thorn roared, his voice echoing off the rune-etched ceiling, storm-gray eyes blazing with the ethical fire that defined him. "This is no judgment of law. It's fear, blind and rotting. Ilara is the bridge the council dreads, her blood the truth that unmasks your tyrants." The words ignited the chamber, the enforcers hesitating for a breath, their fanatic zeal flickering under the scar's radiant glow. Ilara felt it then, the power cresting like a blood moon's rise, lunar threads unfurling from her fingertips, weaving through the air to ensnare a spear mid-thrust, shattering it into glittering fragments that rained like frost. The revelation surged fully now, no longer hidden, but manifest. Her Dampir heritage, forged from vampiric sires who once allied with alphas against greater darknesses. Her scar, the ancestral mark of unions that could heal realms or rend them asunder. It thrilled through her, a visceral rush that sharpened her senses, the copper tang of blood, the ragged symphony of breaths, the moon's indifferent watch from above. Yet with power came the abyss. Infusing Thorn fully would bind him to her immortality, twisting his wolfish vitality into something eternal, solitary, a redemption that cursed him with the very isolation he had vowed to escape after his mate's death. She stepped forward, the scar's heat coiling in her chest, her voice cutting through the din like a blade through silk. "Garrick, halt. This ends not in blood, but in truth. My lineage is no imposture. It is the pact your matriarchs buried in fear. Test it. Witness what my blood can mend." Her hand extended toward Thorn's fresh gash, silver light spilling forth, drawing the poison out in wisps that evaporated like nightmares in dawn. He inhaled sharply, strength flooding back, but his eyes met hers with shadowed torment, the melancholy deepening as he sensed the cost. The enforcers faltered, murmuring among themselves, but Garrick's snarl shattered the moment, his form shifting fully to beastly fury, fur bristling, jaws foaming with rage. "Lies! The council decrees her death and yours for treason. No hybrid sorcery sways us." He charged, a whirlwind of claws and teeth, slamming into Thorn with bone-jarring force. They tumbled across the floor, a tangle of primal savagery, the Alpha's sword skittering away into the shadows. Ilara's instincts ignited. She leaped into the fray, her elongated nails raking Garrick's flank, drawing a bellow that shook the sanctum's pillars. Blood welled hot against her skin, her hunger surging, not for sustenance, but for the wild essence that defined their bond, a thirst that blurred the line between salvation and damnation. The other enforcers closed in, spears thrusting like accusations from the stars, but the scar's power lashed out, a cascade of lunar threads that bound their limbs, forcing them to their knees amid grunts of shock. The air hummed with ancient magic, the ruins awakening as if the moon itself descended, bathing the chamber in ethereal silver. Garrick broke free, his eyes wild with recognition, pinning Thorn against the wall with a forearm like iron. "See? She corrupts you, King. Choose now, slay the pretender, reclaim your throne, or embrace her curse and doom the Pax to war eternal." Thorn's gaze locked on Ilara's, blood trickling from his split lip, his body trembling not from weakness, but from the ethical storm within. The guilt that haunted him, echoes of his mate's final breath in a raid's chaos, her eyes pleading as life ebbed, flared in that look, a melancholy veil over the resolve that had drawn him to her. He had chosen protection over power once, in the ritual's fire, whispering of redemption amid candlelit confessions. Now the trial pressed, love or legacy, his pack's survival or their shared fate. "Ilara," he rasped, shoving Garrick off with a surge of renewed fury. "This power, it asks too much. Eternity without the wild's end. Is that freedom or a prettier cage?" The question pierced her, philosophical and raw, as the enforcers struggled against the lunar bonds, their howls turning to pleas that echoed the wind's wail outside. Ilara knelt beside him, her fingers pressing to his chest, feeling the thunder of his heart against the scar's insistent rhythm. The connection bled deeper, empathy forging tenderness from the terror. But resistance lingered, a rational fear that full union would strip his mortality, cursing him with her immortal solitude. Visions cascaded, prophecies of alpha vampire alliances shattering councils, crowning outcasts as guardians of the veil, yet at the forge of sacrifice. Her blood could infuse him now, granting unbreakable strength to repel the assault, but it would etch eternity into his soul, a moral theft disguised as gift. Garrick rallied, shattering a thread with a claw, lunging once more as the wards groaned under distant reinforcements, the council's full judgment descending like winter's full wrath. Thorn rose, retrieving his sword in a fluid arc, positioning himself between her and the tide. Ilara's scar blazed, demanding release, the power a siren call to merge their essences in defiance. But as spears clashed against lunar light and blood sprayed like defiant petals, the dilemma clawed eternal. Embrace the infusion, redeeming their love through shared immortality and igniting war's blaze, or withhold it, preserving his freedom at the cost of his life, letting rejection's thorns claim him anew. The moon crested, silent arbiter, as Ilara whispered into the fray, "What is destiny, if not the scar we choose to bear?" Yet choices hung suspended, sharp as the blades encircling them, and in that visceral heart of judgment, she tasted the forge's truth. Love's proof lay not in victory, but in the willing bleed of souls entwined. The sanctum's fractured heart pulsed with the rhythm of clashing steel and guttural cries. The air, a choking veil of blood mist and lunar glow that clung to Ilara's skin like a second scar. Her ritual crescent burned as if the moon itself had descended to claim her, its heat threading through her veins in silver rivulets, demanding she yield to the power that could either crown them in defiant unity or shatter them into eternal fragments. Thorn moved like a storm-given form, his sword carving arcs through the enforcer's ranks, each parry a testament to the ethical fire that had drawn her to him, the melancholy king who bore his guilt not as chains, but as the forge for choices that defied the wild's cruel logic. Blood painted his face in stark lines, echoing the wounds of old battles and lost loves, yet his storm-gray eyes sought hers amid the chaos, a silent plea woven from the empathy they had bled into one another during their refuge in these very ruins. Garrick's claws slashed air inches from Thorn's throat, the enforcer's form a blur of fanatic fury, his snarls laced with the council's venomous creed. "You weaken us all, Thorn. Her blood twists you, immortal poison disguised as salvation. Slay the Dhampir, or watch your pack's honor bleed out with yours." The words struck deeper than any blade, stirring the philosophical storm in Ilara's chest. What was redemption, if not the willing embrace of a curse that spared no one? She had resisted this love from the exile's first chill, rationalizing it as a Dhampir's illusion, a bridge built on hunger and fleeting warmth. But now, as lunar threads lashed from her fingertips to bind an enforcer's arm mid-strike, the bond roared alive, instinctive and unyielding, pulling her toward the precipice where sacrifice awaited. She surged forward, the scar's blaze igniting her core. Her elongated fangs bared in a snarl that blended human defiance with vampiric grace. One enforcer lunged at her flank, spear glinting like frost under torchlight, but she twisted, her nails raking his chest in a spray of crimson that warmed her chilled skin. The power thrilled through her, the revelation complete. Her blood was no aberration, but the key to ancient pacts, lunar-touched essence that could infuse mortality with eternity's edge, mending the fractures between wolf and fang. Yet in healing Thorn, she would steal his wild end, the Alpha's freedom to fade into the earth after battles won and oaths kept. Visions cascaded unbidden, their ritual under the blood moon, his calloused hands tracing her scar as he confessed the guilt of his mate's raid-torn death, her whispers coaxing him from melancholy's abyss. That night had forged them, but now it demanded rupture or union, nothing left intact. Thorn dispatched another foe with a thrust that ended in a wet crunch, his breath ragged plumes in the sanctum's freezing draft. He turned to her, blood-slicked and unbowed, the melancholy in his gaze softening into something profounder. Tenderness born of the pain they had shared in Blackthorn Keep's hidden alcoves, where candle flames had danced on walls of wolf pelts and vampiric silk. "Ilara," he growled over the fray, his voice a gravelly anchor amid the enforcer's circling howls. "Do not let this power consume you. I chose exile for your light, not to drag you into my shadows." But his words fractured her resolve, the scar pulsing in sympathy, drawing her essence toward his fresh wounds like a tide to the moon. Garrick seized the moment, barreling into Thorn with beastly force, their bodies slamming against the obsidian mirror's remnants in a shatter of glass that rained like frozen tears. The Alpha's sword clattered free, and claws found flesh, Garrick's raking deep into Thorn's shoulder, silver venom blooming anew. Ilara cried out, the sound raw and visceral, her heart a war drum echoing the wind's wail through the breached corridors. The remaining enforcers closed in, spears forming a cage of judgment, their eyes gleaming with the political zeal that had branded her an impostor, a threat to the matriarch's iron hierarchies. Garrick pinned Thorn, his jaws inches from the king's throat, foaming with triumph. "The council ends this heresy. Your roar protects nothing but ghosts, Thorn. Die as king or live as her thrall. In that suspended breath, eternity's weight crashed upon Alara, the dilemma's cruel forge, where love proved itself not in easy unions, but in choices that scarred the soul. Infuse him fully, and their bond would birth a new realm, Alpha immortal, guardian of the veil, redeeming the Pax from ancient wars through her blood's alchemy. But it would curse him with her solitude, stripping the wolf's natural cycle, binding him to endless nights haunted by guilt's unyielding echo. Withhold it and watch him fall. His mortality, a sacrifice that freed her to wander alone, rejection's thorns blooming into a hollow destiny. The scar demanded action, its glow enveloping them in silver light that pushed back the shadows, the ruins humming with awakened magics, Weavos distant now, silenced by the lunar surge. She dropped to her knees beside them, her hand pressing to Thorn's chest, feeling the thunder of his fading pulse against the scar's insistent rhythm. Tears blurred her vision, salt mingling with the blood on her lips as empathy bled into resolve. Thorn, eternity is no gift without your wild heart. But if love is our proof, let it be this. I choose you, not as thrall, but as equal in the fire. Her blood flowed then, not in trickles, but a deliberate torrent, lunar essence pouring from her palm into his veins, the scar linking them in a blaze of shared agony and ecstasy. He arched, a roar tearing from his throat that shook the sanctum's pillars, the silver poison evaporating as immortality's shadow wove into his core. Garrick recoiled, horror twisting his features, but the power rippled outward, lunar threads ensnaring the enforcers, forcing them to stillness as visions of prophecy flooded their minds, unions defying councils, realms reborn from outcast blood. Thorn rose, transformed, eyes glowing with ethereal gray, his wounds sealing in threads of light, the alpha vigor now laced with vampiric endurance. He struck Garrick down, not with death, but restraint. The enforcer crumpling unconscious as the others yielded, the council's fanaticism cracking under the revelation's weight. The sanctum fell silent, save for the wind's sigh and their mingled breaths, the moon cresting high as witness to their renascimento. Yet nothing ended intact. Thorn's hand trembled in hers, the melancholy deepening with the knowledge of eternity's bane, guilt eternal, love's curse, a crown of thorns they would wear together. Alara leaned into him, the scar cooling to a faint warmth, their foreheads touching in the afterglow. "We are no longer broken alone," she whispered, the words philosophical and somber, "but whole in the bleed of what we chose." The ruins stood as their fragile throne, exile's frost yielding to dawn's hesitant light, filtering through the cracks. They had sacrificed mortality's freedom for redemption's edge, a union that would ignite wars and shatter hierarchies. Yet in that visceral triumph, Alara tasted the truth. Love was no reward, but a moral forge where pain ascended to royalty and destiny claimed its due in blood and fire. The distant horns of retreating enforcers faded, but the ethical shadow lingered. What wars would their eternity unleash? As they stepped into the iron-spine dawn, hands entwined, the scar pulsed one final time, a reminder that every choice birthed both salvation and sorrow. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.